There we go. Okay. Welcome, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, to the public hearing for the proposed permit amendments for Kelkari Phases 2 and 3. We'll have a presentation by the Development Services Director, Keith Niven, and then probably some discussion from the applicant. Then we'll open up the discussion for some public comments. And we're looking forward to that. We really, really do appreciate the public coming out and offering their comments. So please feel bold when you talk, and make sure if you'd like to speak that you sign in so we can keep track of that. We have some administrative business first. We want to approve our minutes from our September 6th meeting. And so I'll ask the commissioners, anybody have a motion about the minutes?
Mr. Chair, real quick before we move approval, I do have an amendment, minor amendment, to page 9 of 10 of the minutes, under Brennan. The word medium should be median, so removal of median and trees, which was the center of the word list. Other than that, they look fine. Mr. Chair, I move approval of the September 6th meeting minutes.
Second.
Can I hold you guys off for a second? I believe that staff noticed something in the minutes. I don't believe that Robert Bach or Carl Swedberg were at the last meeting.
That's correct.
So they should, their names should be stricken as far as members present on page 5 of 36.
Thank you.
And I believe Randy Harrison as well.
If you say so.
That was last meeting.
Right, correct. Thanks.
Was not there. Randy Harris was not there last time.
Okay.
Great.
With those amendments, Mr. Chair, I move approval of the meeting minutes.
Second.
Any discussion? Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion is carried. So, Keith?
So I'm going to turn over the steering wheel to Dan Martinez,
Okay.
New planner for Development Services, and he's going to lead us through this conversation this evening.
Great.
So, good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for your service and for being here tonight.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Is this better here? All right, great. Thank you for letting me know. And I, again, want to thank the public. Your input is very much appreciated. So we're here for the second meeting of the Kelkari Phases 2 and 3. The first thing that we want to address is the briefing response memo that was written regarding the comments and concerns that we received at the last meeting on September 6th. Now, I actually want to give the commissioners the option of, I'm happy to go through each of the issues and discuss staff's and the applicant's response, or I can just leave it open to questions that you may have about particular issues.
Excuse my ignorance, is this public document, so the people that have made comments would have the chance to read that response?
Yes, that response is available on the website now.
Okay.
And it is part of the packet that was issued for tonight.
And so for those who signed up last meeting, my understanding is this packet went out to all of them. Remember, that was part of the request, to go ahead and sign up, even if they weren't going to speak, so that they could get a copy of the briefing response memo. So my hope is that anyone who was here last time got a copy of this in advance of tonight's meeting, and if not, please let us know.
I do have additional copies if anybody, any of the commissioners or members of the public would like one.
Great. Yeah, the applicant's going to make a presentation, is it?
Yeah, so first we're going to go through the briefing response memo, then the applicant's going to make a presentation, then I assume you guys will open it up for additional public comments.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, question. On the staff report and the application and the response that we received, it was very well put together. I do have a question on page 7 of 22 on, or either page 21 of 36, under the traffic issue. On the last paragraph prepared by the staff, it says there's no plan to install a signal light at Wildwood and Sunset. Can you expand on that a little bit?
So there was an issue raised both in email and at the last meeting with regards to an idea that had been floated around. I'm unaware as to whether that idea came from staff, the applicant, or if it was just floated around in the neighborhood. But that there would be a traffic signal installed at Wildwood and Sunrise, and there were some concerns about that. Folks didn't feel that it was necessary. Staff concurs with that, and our traffic engineers have determined that it does not meet the criteria for requiring a signal, which is why that's in there. So there are no plans to install a signal at Wildwood and Sunrise.
And the criteria is that of the model that we talked about? This is where they cross Sunrise and Wildwood.
So the traffic warrants for a signal installation, I'm not a traffic engineer, so I'll share my knowledge. There's a number of warrants that need to be met. Some have to do with safety, and others have to do with delay. So, for example, if you have to wait so long at an intersection to get out because there's no gaps in the queue, you could make a decision that might be a poor decision, which would then likely lead to a traffic accident, right? So that's a delay issue that can result in a safety concern, which could then generate the need for the installation of a traffic light. Based on the volumes at this intersection of Wildwood and Sunrise, there are not enough trips going through this intersection to warrant the installation of a traffic light. And so therefore, because it doesn't meet the warrants, you don't put one in, because where you put a traffic light in where it's not warranted, then people tend to also make bad decisions at those type of intersections. So that's the guiding principles.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, Keith, but I thought at one point in time there was some talk about putting a roundabout in that area, in that intersection.
I don't have the history on that. Maybe somebody with deeper seated history in the audience that might be speaking later could address that. I want to remind the commission, earlier the approval for Kelkari included phases 2 and 3 included 126 units, and now we're down to 72. So the additional reduction in trips could also be one of the reasons why we're not talking about any traffic control at Sunrise and Wildwood other than the stop sign. So I don't know, Commissioner, whether or not there was a roundabout ever discussed. I know there are a number of roundabouts being discussed on Newport, but I hadn't heard of any migrating up into this neighborhood.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And did the commission have any other questions regarding the contents of the briefing response memo?
I do have a question, yeah. On page 23 of 36, under 8, landslide potential, area in which I think there's probably a bit of community interest. Under the staff report, it says that the city's consultant asked for additional information and corrections to the original geotechnical report. We're not going to probably be able to get back into all the details of the geotechnical report, but I wonder if you could summarize some of the points that were requested by Goldberg of, I think, Terra Associates is the original on this. Is that correct?
Golder Associates. So yes, and I was present at some of those meetings, but I'm also not a geotech engineer, so I'm going to actually ask Richard if you're comfortable putting that question on the sidebar for right now, because Ted Shepper from Terra Associates is here, and I believe could address your question during the applicant's presentation.
All right.
Other questions or comments?
I guess I've got one on page 19 of 22 or 33 of 36. The last paragraph about the wall supporting building 8 and the condition that it could be split up into terraced walls. Would that change the amount of impervious surface that would be in place, or just the amount of disturbance?
And we might want to put a map up. You know, so part of, there were a number of questions that came up about this condition following the first commissioner meeting. And, you know, one of the issues that was brought up was the visual impact potentially of that 20-foot wall adjacent to the subdivision that's on First Place. And so this condition really is intended to lessen the visual impact of that wall. And it's basically what it's going to do is because you're basically going to offset the wall, you're taking a piece of backyard for some of those units, that fourplex that's up there at the top of the wall. You're taking 5 feet of their backyard and you're putting it down in between the two walls. So technically, yes, there is some more impervious as you have now 2 walls when you just had 1 previously. But I think what we heard from the applicant was they're going to stay within their impervious allocation and not ask for any additional. So that's still my understanding.
Mr. Chair, question. So, and maybe this is one that the applicant may need to speak to, but I'll raise it now. On page 33 of 36, there's a condition, it's the center of the page, and it talks about storm drainage and the need for stormwater facilities, probably specifically around detention. It says that in the second sentence, due to a change in property ownership and limitations on existing stormwater facilities in the area, the project may need to increase detention or provide additional capacity to existing public facilities. And so the question is, I'm not sure where on the property that's going to happen, and if it's a significant facility, it could have an impact on the configuration of the project. So I want to understand how that's going to be addressed, either through staff or through the applicant.
A little bit of both. So there was an updated condition for H and condition N. Those took place subsequent to the briefing response memo. And that was actually going to be my next topic, was to discuss those 2 updates. They were the result of public comment and also coordination between staff and the applicant. Now, with regards to the actual location and the technical aspects of it, I will leave that to the applicant. I do want to refer to the updated conditions. Condition H now states that, as noted in the table on page 4 of this briefing response memo, identified the project as vested prior to stormwater approvals. However, the city has identified some downstream concerns. The applicant has agreed to work with the city on potential solutions to these concerns. The project will address the downstream systems that may be directly impacted by the development or propose alternate solutions for discharge location methods.
So, and I'll unpack that a little bit. So our stormwater engineers had a meeting with the applicant since the last commission meeting to try and, the applicant was a little concerned about the vagueness of condition H and was hoping to pen it in a little bit more. So there was conversation, and what I understand, and I think the civil engineers for the applicant will provide a greater level of detail, but we're talking about the off-site discharge points primarily. So what you have in the area is you have some existing erosion of the banks of Issaquah Creek, and so that's a concern. So as a discharge point, potentially doing something that might exacerbate the existing erosion issues is a problem. But there's also a city stormwater facility that discharges to the wetland structure to the, I'm going to guess that's south. And that facility right now is, for lack of more technical term, overcapacity. So in other words, it's a cartridge filter that leads to a level spreader. The water that's moving through that system is moving too slowly. So potentially adding more water to something that's already draining too slowly is not a good choice. So part of the conversations with the applicant and why this condition and the clarification, which was read to you by Dan, is providing greater clarity on what we're really talking about relating to stormwater, which is we need to have some additional engineering to figure out where's the water going to go and how does it get there without causing an impact to kind of the sensitive areas that we have in this vicinity.
Okay. All right. I'll wait to hear more on the solution from the technical
Now
experts.
that I've tempted your appetite.
Condition N was, as I mentioned, it was the result of a resident concern. We did receive 3 additional comments after the briefing response memo was issued. So I have copies of those available for you if you'd like them, and I'll go through and address some of those. But condition N, no construction traffic will be allowed to use the cul-de-sac on Sunrise Place or First Place as a turnaround. The condition will be placed on the site work and building permits.
So concern from the community, we heard a little bit at the last commission meeting, but then as Dan said, we received additional comments via email. So because we saw that as a concern, so if you take Sunrise Place past Kelkari, it ends in a, I don't want to call it a substandard cul-de-sac, but it's a fairly small cul-de-sac, and one of the residents expressed some concern about construction traffic using that as a turnaround. And so we talked to the applicant about adding a new condition N that would basically say, you're going to figure out with your contractors to how to turn around on site and not necessarily use the public street system. So we drafted that, we sent it out, and then we got the Me Too emails, which was great. So the comment was, why not include First Place on that as well? Because there's a cul-de-sac on First Place, and why would we allow that? And I don't think the intent was to. So we changed the condition to say First Place and Sunrise Place.
Additional concerns and comments that we received. One was related to play areas, and I'm going to mention that now, and hopefully the applicant can discuss that further. But there's some concern amongst the Foothill residents that there's not enough recreation space in Kelkari proper, and that they may be impacted by that in some way. Second email that we received was a recommendation for approval and support of the project from somebody who lives in Kelkari Phase 1. And lastly, we received some concerns. The third email was had touched on issues that were addressed in the briefing response memo. The only other thing was related to construction hours, which they would like limited from 8 to 4. The city standard for all projects is 7 to 6. So I don't know that we're in a position to place that kind of condition on the applicant.
Other comments? We're ready to hear from the applicant.
All right. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to
Dan. Thank you.
Good evening, Commission members, members of the public. Thank you for joining us all this evening. We're actually really pleased to be here tonight. My name is David MacDuff. I'm Vice President of Development with Intercorp. We are the applicant. My address is 411 South First Avenue, Seattle, Washington, 98104. May I suggest we're going to go through what is a relatively brief but hopefully inspiring presentation of what we've been working on with the city and staff for 2.5 years. We're really excited about it. Rich Wagner from Bayless will be our chief presenter. May I suggest we go through that presentation first, and then in response to direct questions from the commission and or public, we do have a plethora of experts here who can happily speak, hopefully speak appropriately to the level of the questions the commission and or public may have. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Rich Wagner.
Thank you, David. My name is Rich Wagner. I got to work on this project in its original inception back in it was 1990 something. And it was a wonderful project then, and it's just thrilling for me personally to be a part of these next phases. I'm with Bayless Architects, 10801 Main Street in Bellevue, Washington, 98054. Also tonight with us, I'm going to bring up another presentation here. Every seems a little different. Thank you. This is just a preview slide of some of those that we'll be looking at earlier. Also on our team today, this evening, we have representatives from Corps Civil Engineers, Terra Geotechnical, Watershed, and Traffic Engineers Northwest. And I know that you're familiar with all these in the city, and that was one of the reasons why we wanted to bring them to the project, because they have so much experience in this community and everything that goes on. We're also joined tonight by Christy Triple from Rowley Properties, and I feel that it's always wonderful to see Mr. Skip Rowley here. Thank you. I won't go any further. I don't know how much. Yeah. Staff already mentioned, but I want to highlight that this is an application to approve a minor amendment to an already approved project. This is not a new project application. Mr. Niven, I think, reported quite extensively on that last time when he went through all the amendments that were being presented and had been previously approved and any conditions that we were looking to amend. This application is unique in that as a minor amendment, it's a level 2 process. The only reason we're bringing it forward is for the purposes of transparency here. As a level 2 process, staff has the authority to decide whether it is a minor amendment, and the history on this project shows that, yes, they have made this decision, and it is a minor amendment. I think to appreciate the proposal, though, let me begin with a couple images. Oh, that stays here. These are the existing facilities. For those that haven't had a chance to get out there in a while, these are, we brought these forward because they were part of the, I would say, the drivers of why phase 2 and 3 look like it looks. We wanted to take not just our inspiration, but in fact much of the exact detailing and color from the existing facilities. One of the things that really defines Kelkari, though, and we can talk about the nuances of colors and things like that, but some of the things that really define the architecture is the large roof planes, which you see here, and although hidden in the backside here of this building. But you know, when you drive up to Kelkari, the first thing that hits you is these large roof planes. The next piece is all the modulation that all the buildings have, the exposed timber detailing that all the buildings have. We've also been looking, when you get into a little detail up in the front, you see these architectural railings. We also have one of the things we worked with on Kelkari 1 was making sure the units had plenty of light inside. So we're working with extra large windows. You know, you always see the little apartments with the little windows in them. That's not the case for Kelkari. The multiple materials, we're using actually, the original has bevel siding, shingle siding, board and bat, and every place has this stone base that you see here. The colors that that are used now are all earth tones. There's probably a half dozen, maybe 8 or 9 colors that are used out there to create some textures. We want to carry all those forward. This is a slide of some of the amenity spaces that are in Phase 1. Certainly the clubhouse, if you've had a chance to be invited to a reception or a party or some event there, it's been a spectacularly well received and a wonderful place to be. It's highly detailed, and it captures a lot of the detailing that we hope to advance to Phase 2 and 3. This is the barbecue area. We talk about some of the open spaces and gathering spaces that are in Phase 1. This is definitely a big one. In fact, I don't have a good picture of it, but right around the corner, come on, over this way, there's this wonderful plaza looking out over the creek. Now, the creek vegetation tends to get grown in, so you can't always exactly see the creek, but you can sure enjoy it and hear it. And then over on this side, there's this little fireplace area, which has been quite well received. And I hope that the current residents are able to get use out of that, especially this last summer. There's a lot of gathering places. There's courts over here. There's a child play area in the middle, and there's seating areas in Phase 1. But those are some of the areas that help really define the character of the existing facility. I'd like to talk a little bit about the proposed buildings, and I think you can see one of our biggest goals was to create a continuity of the architecture. We are using, in the composition of this site, we're actually only using 3 unit types, and I'll walk through briefly on those. But they're combined in different buildings and in different facades, so that, as an example, an A unit doesn't always have the same facade as an A unit. It might vary. And we think that's been a big asset in terms of creating the textures and the modulation that we're going to see here. This actually is Unit A. What's interesting about Unit A, and can everyone see this, not in detail, but generally where I'm pointing? The A units are
Would ask you to, we can't hear you.
So,
if
Rich, you're going to have to take the mic with you if you can.
No. I've got it here. I'm not supposed to point it at you.
Burn a hole in your sweater.
Is that FAA approved?
Thank you. The A units are along Sunrise Place, these units here, and they're along Cabin Creek. One of the reasons we wanted to use the A unit in this particular configuration was, again, they have the large roof planes, so they help capture the character. The other thing that we're using the A units for is on these units, there are no garages facing the front. All of these are porches and stoops that'll come out with sidewalks to the street here and sidewalks along Cabin Creek. The A units, the key there is all of the accesses for the parking is to the back. But the other bonus here is they're only 2 stories. The B units Similarly, this one does have parking. These are what we're calling our downhill units, or often called daylight basement units, where the garage and the entries are on the front, bedrooms are on the top and below, and in the basement down below, or the lower level, is other media spaces. The artist captured this tree. One of the things that you'll see in all of our renderings is we're trying to maintain that tree. And I know that for those who have been here a long, long time, that tree has been preserved in every scheme that I think we've ever presented to you. The uphill units, these occur here in Phase 3. And basically, they're the unit that allow us to tuck the unit up into the hill a little bit, kind of heel that in. But we're trying to make sure the depths of those are not, they're shallow. This is another great example of where you can see the large roofs, all the modulated forms, and they're modulated not only horizontally but vertically. The exposed timber detailing will all come out here. Again, large windows, architectural railings, and again, the same materials, sidings, colors that are being used in Kelkari 1. We think in all of this, we've put together a pretty compelling solution. But I'd like to talk a little bit about, okay, how do we make sure it's a minor amendment and still is consistent with what was approved? In order to do that, I'm going to do some comparison graphics here of original and proposed. This is actually the original site plan that was approved years ago. You might recognize Concept Engineers' little logo down here. The plan itself, this is Sunrise coming through. Cabin Creek was proposed through here, and it's built, and we're not moving that in any of the projects. The access to Phase 3 has always been here and will remain here. The buildings for Phase 1 completed here, including the clubhouse. Phase 2, these buildings are here. And remember, these are 4-story buildings, sometimes very close to the street, as you can see here. In Phase 3, the same building type or the same building look lines along the grade here up into Phase 3, and the road access is in behind the buildings here. We've tried to capture this in, there's an exhibit in your packet called Exhibit 1, but we've realized it's kind of hard to read, so we've broken it down here into the various layers, and it gives you a much better understanding of what we're proposing. I think one of the first things to know is that this is a story of less. We are working with less units, less building square footage, less traffic, less site disturbance, less retaining walls, and less critical areas impacts. The arrangement that you can see here is built out. I think I spoke to the entrances here, and Sunrise continues. Phase 2 is this area right here, which was graded at the end of Phase 1. So it's pretty self-explanatory as to how that could have been developed, and now we're using many of those same grades in the open space. From the very beginning, our goal on this whole project was to minimize the land disturbance and the impervious surfaces. That's why we've got the narrower streets, the little tighter buildings. The buildings don't have as much depth as you might usually see in townhomes in this market. This is the approved plan, and one of the things that you'll notice is the open space that surrounds the entire area. As a part of our final project, we are going to be keeping 15 acres in open space and forested. The next thing I wanted to look at was kind of how do we unpack this. This is the disturbed areas that were included in the original approval. And you can see, especially in areas like this in Phase 2, where we're encroaching quite a bit into that slope. The trail, for your reference, is a very dim line you can see right through here, crosses the street and continues up this way. In our proposal, you'll see we're going to try and really stay out of that. The area of disturbance, in fact, I'll bring it up later, is actually reduced by 10%. Again, this is the acreage here that will be preserved. when I say preserved, I want to highlight that it's not only being developed here, but it's going to remain in the ownership and control of the homeowners association. And it will probably have some easements through it as well. For ownership, excuse me. If I dive in a little bit further then to some of the, how do we get to our proposal? This shows the same streets here. Cabin Creek goes through here. We've laid in what our buildings are going to look like now. The access lanes here, phase 2, 3 is the same way here. And you can see by the location of this line, this kind of teal green line, how much we're really pulling back from some of these critical areas that we really didn't want to get into. If I take this and then overlay all the exhibits, now this is the one that's in your packet, but I think you can see where so many of the amendments that are going to be proposed actually lay. I'd like to take a little bit of time then and talk about our particular site plan. With everything else kind of screened down, this brings out the buildings, and it's the same site plan you see. Well, it's oriented differently. In our site plan, to the left is north. And I have to admit, when you're out on this site or when you're trying to study it, it's really easy to get confused about where your compass lines are. Excuse me, one of the things you'll see right away is these streets here and up into here, and this street here. In Kelkari, all the streets existing are private roads. And what we're proposing in these is that they too will remain private roads. The trail connections that we've talked about here that come through, these trails actually lead into these woods. I think one of the speakers from the public reminded us 2 weeks ago what a wonderful journey it is to go up into there. So I wanted to put these in and say, yeah, it's amazing. I remember when we did the original project, one of the goals was to market it to people who would come home, put on their boots, and head up the hill. And I understand from residents that that happens a lot. At least the residents that do that tell me it's a lot. The only thing we're going to really affect in this trail issue here is, if I go back, there's a little area right here where the trail comes up, and we're going to rebuild this stairway and move it, I don't know, maybe 10 feet to the south or to the east a little bit. So it's a minor amendment here that will help get the traffic through and up to the street and be able to give them good passage across the street. Sidewalks, I want to zoom in a little bit on this area right here. This is basically phase 2. And I say this because I want to highlight a couple of the areas that are going on here. First of all is the sidewalks. We're going to complete the sidewalks on Cabin Creek all the way through here, so you can actually walk without going through the road. We're going to add a sidewalk on the other side of the road all the way along, all the way down to this lane intersection. All the crosswalks that we're going to have will be concrete crosswalks. They're not just painted stripes. The sidewalk as it goes into the project, again in phase 2, and similarly you'll see in phase 3. Wherever there's a front door, it's serviced by a sidewalk. This is the B units, the downhill units. These are the A units that are on the sidewalk here for Cabin Creek. Landscaping, we expect the landscaping to be very robust. We've got one of the premier landscapers on our team in this area. All the buffers, because we're going to pull out of this, we definitely want to do some heavier buffering around here. If you're curious, it was right in this area where we talked to staff about doing the double retaining walls. The landscaping that we're going to be using will be very similar to the landscaping that is existing in the phase 1, primarily because we want not just the architecture to look similar, but the whole site experience to be similar. And we'll be doing substantial buffer enhancements. A little closer look at some of these areas. This is the overall site plan. This is phase 2 here and here. This is phase 3. The question came up about parks and open space. We've got, we don't have a formal park, if you will, but I think we have a lot of play areas for children, and we have a lot of open space within the project. One of the play areas, excuse me, this area right here, as you can see, is picnic benches looking out over the steep slopes here that we're going to maintain. This area over here is actually a little pocket park for the play area. It's going to have climbing rocks, some jungle gym stuff, and again, a place for mom and dad or the big brother to keep their eye out. Up in phase 2 or phase 3, first of all, you'll be able to get there. Crossing the road here, we're going to intersect where you naturally cross with a trail that comes up through this hillside, stops at this kind of picnic outlook area looking out over this wetland. Again, preserving the tree. And along this particular trail, we're going to do a dry creek bed. Well, I say dry creek bed. We hope it's got water in it, but we don't want to overpromise that. There's a lot of water in the site, but if you drive by and there's nothing flowing, that's why I wanted to footnote that. At the south end of phase 3, we've got this hammerhead turnaround. That was discussed a little bit last week. But in that hammerhead turnaround, we hate to just see it lay fallow, nor do we want people parking in that at any time. So we're proposing this as that hammerhead as a play area with things like hopscotch and crossball. Again, places for parents and big brothers, sisters to look out over them. But this is also a very enjoyable space because it looks out over this entire wetland area. These are not just drawn or painted, they're actually going to be laid in. Architecturally, I'm going to take a quick run through these. I don't want to say too much, but as I mentioned, we've got 3 different unit types, A, B, and C. The floor plans, this is A. And I mention this because when you look at the graphics, the 3D graphics, I want you to know that they're real. They're not an artist concept of something that might happen. We actually worked very closely with the renderer on these to make sure that they were showing exactly what we wanted. This shows that the floor plans have been worked out, the elevations have been worked out, and in particular, our references to the building materials. These are pictures taken right out of Kelkari 1. This is building B. Similarly to the existing materials, and again, similarly to the large roofs and the fenestrations. Unit C, in fact, in all of these units, you'll also notice that we did some side views, so this allowed us to calculate heights and make sure that we're within the bounds of that goal. And it also shows how much grade change happens between, say, this is the basement building. I highlight these, like I said, because I want you to know that the artist renderings, when you're looking at them, are the result of some studied solutions. They're not just pretty pictures. I talked a lot about less. I'd like to actually put some numbers behind them. Oh, excuse me. This is our commitment, which is in your packet, to the colors and materials, units A, B, and C, how we think those will go. And again, these will be refined in the actual permit drawings. And when I say refined, I want to speak highly of staff when we talk to them about that. Because if you think staff lets us get away with anything, that would be a misunderstanding. I've talked a lot about less, so I wanted to actually put some numbers on the table here for you to consider. The unit count is down. In phases 2 and 3, we originally had 126. We now have 72, 43% reduction. The gross building area, the units are a little bigger now. We're about 22% reduction, bigger than what the condo apartments are. The building levels, I just spoke of this. This is actually very important. All of the buildings in the original approval and in Kelkari 1 are 4 stories. All of the buildings in Kelkari 2 and 3 will be 3 stories. The width, I highlight the width because it gives you the impression of the mass. The existing buildings and those proposed in the original plan, 185 feet to 200 feet, We're proposing 50 to 125 feet, 38% reduction. Traffic, our traffic engineer has done a lot of studies on these things. And I will tell you, too, that, well, I'll come back to that. All of our work has been peer reviewed. The traffic, the daily trips are dropping by 49%. And more to the point, I think, as we all travel to and from work, the AM peak trips dropped to 61% or of what was originally approved. And the PM peak trips accordingly drop as well. Staff mentioned that the traffic, that was actually the fees to mitigate the traffic impacts for all of these were in place in the original proposal. The site disturbance, phases 2 and 3, a bit of a decrease there, 10%, 24,000 feet. I mean, that's a half acre that we're going to stay clear of. The other thing I might note on that is in the original proposal, we were doing a lot of work in wetland, what's now called Wetland 1, and we are no longer needing to do that work. We're taking advantage, if you will, of the 12 to 15 years of growth that have happened in there. There's no reason for us to go in there anymore. Retaining walls have dropped off to 11% of what was originally approved. And impervious areas, there's a little bit of a bump here. I put this here because this is what the data shows in your packet. But as staff reported, based on meetings earlier this week and late last week, the applicant is committed to balancing out the impervious areas in phases 1, 2, and 3 so that they equal what was previously approved. The thing, I mentioned a couple times the changing in the mass of the buildings. So I put this graphic together to really give you an impression of what would be changing. This is the building C. Remember, these are the ones on the uphill of phase 3. These, for your reference, are building A's. These are the ones along the street. If the original proposal were to be implemented, this is what the backs of those buildings would look like, and this is what the fronts of the buildings would look like. So I think you can see we're seeing a substantial reduction in the impacts, certainly the visual impacts and the mass impacts that would be up along the road. One of the things I've been particularly concerned about as we work through this was how the buildings come up to Sunrise Place. The other highlight here is, again, only 2 stories and front porches. When you're coming home from work, that's the impression you'll have as you drive by the phase 2. I think you can see that all these are less, and thus our conclusion of the minor amendments. A couple comments on the detail. I think when we talk about technical reports, we've done a pile of technical reports, and I want to make sure that the concept of peer review is understood. That's basically where the city hires another consultant to look at our work. It's typically spelled P-E-E-R, as if we're collaborating, but it often feels like P-E-A-R, over our shoulders. So that did occur on all of these, and we wanted to make sure, too, that you understood that those reports were done very early in our work, and so they drove our decisions on how to develop the site. They weren't developed to justify what we were doing. They actually tuned our designs all the way through the process. The less is more. I think we're confident that the proposed minor amendment before you this evening will provide less impact. It will help secure the critical areas. It'll make for a safe neighborhood. And again, it preserves 15 acres of the lands around the site. So I want to thank you for your time. You know, I know you guys make Issaquah better, and I think you do it every 2 weeks. I actually worked on the Renton Planning Commission for 14 years, so I know the commitment that it takes to be here, and I want to thank you for that. Especially want to thank you for your diligence in reading everything we presented. We hope that tonight, and I want to emphasize tonight, our approach has been so compelling that you're able to endorse the application this evening. With that, I'll close, and I think we had some technical questions come up already. If those are still on the table, okay. Ted, could you talk to us a little bit about slope stability?
Good evening, Commissioners. Ted Shepper, President of Terra Associates, 12220 113th Avenue Northeast, Suite 130, Kirkland, Washington. And so Commissioner Sanford, I believe you had the question regarding what Golder has required of us in terms of their peer review and additional information they wanted to see to support the requested some modifications in terms of the steep slope impacts. Well, first off, I've been involved with the Kelkari project since its beginning as well, back in the early 1990s. Built phase one with Skip, and then things went kind of dormant for a while, and got contacted by Intercorp, and they were looking at the project. We went back out to the site in September of 2015 and completed additional site explorations, drilled 16 additional test borings, and prepared a geotechnical report, which basically updated our original geotechnical report that was done back in the mid-90s, and submitted that. Subsequent that submittal, the city had Golder do a peer review of the work that we had done. And as a result of the peer review, what happened is we had to produce an additional report specific to address the critical areas in our critical areas report. So that's the main thing that Golder had us do, provided some additional site geologic reconnaissance, stability analysis that involved taking, in terms of geotechnical engineering, we take material engineering principles and apply it to material that does not have, very uniform properties, right? Because soils can change dramatically in a short distance time. So they actually had us do a sensitivity analysis in our stability, where we took a range of parameters and determined and ran our stability analysis and determined, if we have a slight reduction in the soil strength, how much does that impact the safety factors? And that's all summarized in this report. The other thing that they had us expand on was the proximity of the Foothills slide, which is approximately 500 feet southeast of phase 3 of this project, and expand on why, what happened at the Foothills slide and why ground conditions here at the Kelkari phases 2 and 3 aren't subject to the same. And the bottom line on that is that it's basically very different geology. The geology at the Foothills slide, that slide occurred in November of 1995, and that was a result of actually some grading the grading took place in October and into November. They actually had a cut, and they placed some and opened up a silt and clay formation, the Cushman formation, and that's what started moving. The Kelkari site, there are no silt and clay formations. Basically, we have fill materials that were associated with previous grading at the site. Below that is an outwash sand and gravel deposit, and below that is bedrock, sandstone and siltstone bedrock. Very different geology, and different ground conditions. The other thing on the Foothills slide, what happened, they started the grading activity obviously at the worst time of the year, in starting on the beginning of the winter. When they started the grading, had significant rainfall event, and things started to move. And so in response to that moving, they started trying to install subsurface drains to capture and collect groundwater that was impacting the slide. The final resolution on the Foothills was a system of drains that were installed up gradient of the slide, and then also at the base of the toe of the slide, some very long horizontal drains were advanced up into the hillside to capture the groundwater and control it and keep it from impacting the slide mass. And that was successfully completed in, I believe, 1996, and the slide has been stable since. We're going to be more proactive to that. We know on phase 3 on the west side, up gradient side, there's quite a bit of groundwater comes out of that hillside. And so the first thing that we're going to be doing is before any major grading goes on, we're going to install a subsurface drain that's going to capture and control that groundwater, and that water will actually be routed down to help feed the hydrology of the wetland areas to the east of Phase 3. So those are the main differences between the Foothills and the Phase 2 and 3 of the Kelkari project.
Any other questions for Geotech?
I had one question. If we go to the site disturbance plan, the aerial site plan, are the ECA areas delineated on that plan? Is that blue hatched area?
Excuse me here. I'm well past 30, so I have
All right, sorry.
issues here. Let me go down to here and turn that off. That was in this area?
Yeah, the last one, or any of them really, and maybe the first one shows it better. So there's a faint blue hatched area. Is that delineating where the ECA occurs?
Oh, here?
Or is it shown at all?
No, I don't think the wetland was picked up here.
So what does that hatch represent?
There is a little blue there.
That's the wetland.
Oh, that's right, that's right. So yes, it is the wetland.
Okay. And then does the Foothills slide show up on this map?
No, it doesn't. I think the Foothills slide is probably way back over in here.
Okay. All right, thank you.
If there's nothing else for Geotech?
I'm here all night, so if something comes up, go ahead and ask.
We can come back. Yeah. Jim, I know there was a question about outfalls. Can you help us out on that one?
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Jim Olson with Core Design, 14711 Northeast 29th Place. Northeast 29th Place, Suite 101 in Bellevue, Washington. I'm one of the principals in the firm and the engineer for the project. The question came up with regards to storm drainage, and a couple things I jotted down as I was listening to the presentation and things that have changed with this Condition H that you see now in your packet this evening. The first of which I want to elaborate on is I think there's been a change with regards to the vesting of the project. I think the city now has changed that we are vested to the standards that were in place at the time of the original approval. And we met with the city on 2 different occasions to discuss storm drainage because they voiced concerns about downstream systems. Both are existing issues that occur today, not an impact of this project, and one erosion problem that occurred last fall due to the excess rain that we had last fall. It's fair to say that we've met with the city. Core Design has provided several alternatives that might mitigate or alleviate these problems. The city is reviewing those currently. I can't stand in front of you today to say that we have a solution. They're reviewing it as we speak. But it's safe to say that the city believes that this is a problem that can be solved with regards to their systems that they have existing issues with. I think that's, and I just wanted to touch on the impervious surface. I think Rich talked about it as well. We do show a slight increase, and we've discussed with the city about modifying the site plan to reduce that impervious where we can, or provide pervious material to bring our site in compliance with the original impervious surface amount that was approved. Does that answer your questions, kind of vaguely?
Sure. So the one question, so it didn't sound like from your response there's any additional on-site detention that's required. We're talking about dealing with the off-site impacts of the storm drain outfall? Is that?
At this point, the issues that were referenced indirectly in that condition are existing city issues that are off-site. They have, I think it was mentioned here, they have a flow spreader that's failing or is surcharged. I'm not sure why that is. And they have a pipe that has been crushed that will have to be replaced. So
But we do have substantial retainage systems within our project in Phase 3 in particular.
that will be constructed as part of Phase 3?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, thanks.
Other comments?
Thank you.
Thank you. We will be here all night. I hope
Hopefully not all night.
Hopefully we
you.
won't. So I thought there was a question on traffic. Yeah, it seemed like there was some discussion over the protocol or whatever, the warrant for a traffic signal there. And could a traffic engineer give us a general explanation of how that, what the requirement is for a traffic signal? It seemed like that was a discussion item.
Good evening. My name is Michael Reed. I'm principal and founder of Transportation Engineering Northwest. Mailing address is P.O. Box 65254, Seattle 98155. I can generally speak to the question about signal warrants. The Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or MUTCD as we call it for short, is a federal standard that all transportation engineering professionals follow, and local and state and other county jurisdictions follow as well. The primary reason why that is kind of one of our Bibles that we look at is, for the most part, well, several different reasons. Protection of the traveling public, but also protection to the jurisdictions that install and place those things from a liability standpoint. If you installed any traffic control device that's not warranted, the jurisdiction, or the engineer for that matter, that makes that decision can be held liable if it's not warranted when someone has a collision there, because they make a right turn or a left turn on red because there's nobody on the side street, and they just go because there's no traffic. So in the MUTCD, there's a series of warrants to warrant signal control, and there's about 9 different warrants. Most of them are volume or delay warrants. They're warrants for 4 hours a day, 8 hours a day, peak hour warrants. So the warrants look at both traffic on the major street and minor street. Typically, the minor street is the one that's stop controlled, intersecting a major arterial. And those get into the different volumes have to occur over the course of continuous hours or one peak hour or what have you. And they're there to basically represent the relative delay of side streets, typical gaps that might be available in traffic volume streams of those different magnitudes. And the criteria are also adjusted depending on the speed of the major street or the size of the community. Essentially, a smaller community that maybe has only 2,000 people that live in it has a different warrant than the city of Seattle does, because the people in Seattle tend to drive a little more, I won't use the word aggressively, but they're willing to accept less gaps, fewer gaps, or shorter gaps. So there's other criteria in the MUTCD, safety being one of them, collision history, pedestrian demand that's there that needs to cross the street. And there's other more qualitative criteria that gets down to, is a signal warranted given that we have a system of other signals along an arterial, and this will just help facilitate another point to connect to it. There's not a specific standard on when you can put in a signal because it meets one warrant or it meets 5 warrants. It's really up to the judgment of the engineer in this case, and that would be the city traffic engineer or public works director. So that's kind of a general overview of what signal warrants are.
Okay, thank you.
I had a follow-up question. I'm not sure if this falls under your purview, but there's a pedestrian crossing proposed, and I assume that the new phases it's being used to access the amenity facilities in the Phase 1. And were there any studies, or is there a traffic signal proposed at that crossing?
You're talking about the one between phases 1 and 3? Or phases 1, 2,
The one
and 3?
that crosses Sunrise
Yeah.
Place southwest.
I can tell you purely from a warrant standpoint, it wouldn't meet it from either the pedestrian demand or just the volume that's on the roadway today, or in the future with the project.
Okay.
I personally went out and performed field visit there, looked at site distance to confirm that those were all met, and I was able to freely walk across the street with no traffic at all. And I think I only saw one car, and I was there for half an hour.
And that's placed strategically such that you do have site distances.
Correct. It's also placed strategically from what I would call a pedestrian desire line. You have pedestrian facilities that lead you to a certain point, and that point is where you need to, where you logically would cross.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, can I ask a question about one of the conditions staff had placed was to add a sidewalk at what would be the west side of the street as it connects to Sunrise. And I guess I have the question about, in looking at trying to figure out where pedestrians will go in there, would anybody use that sidewalk? So look at the people on the east side. Thank you, Rich. The people right there. And the people on the east side coming out from Division 3 would just use that sidewalk. And the people, I guess that sidewalk would only be used for people on the west side of Division 3. But I think when I get to the northwest corner unit, if you can move the cursor, which I guess down a little bit to the other side of the street, right there. So it's a sidewalk from there to Sunrise, and it seems to me, so the question is, it seems like if I were there, I would just go straight across to the street, because there's no sidewalk on the west side of Sunrise, correct?
Yes,
So
to that intersection,
to that.
but not beyond.
Right, so it seemed like I would just cross over to the other sidewalk across the street. In other words, I'm saying, I don't know that it's worth putting that other sidewalk in if it takes up more impervious surface.
Well, and it does impact the creek buffer.
Yeah.
So that was a staff-generated condition, right?
Yeah.
So if you were walking from Phase 3 to Wildwood, where would you go? You're pushed into the pavement, right? Because there's no continuous sidewalk.
But there's no sidewalk on there where he has the cursor. There's no sidewalk on the west side.
So, right, you'd cross the street at that intersection. So if I lived in any of the units on the south side of Phase 3, I would want to walk on a sidewalk all the way, right?
I think I would.
There's a missing piece.
That's right. If it were me, I would cross over. If I were.
If you're going north,
Right.
you're going to cross over to the south side of the Phase 3 road to go north?
Yes, because it's a shorter distance.
No.
Shorter distance from there to get over to the street. It's a shorter distance to cross there rather than go around that curve.
I hear what you're saying.
And I guess that would be the question from a traffic engineer looking at the plan. You talked about pedestrian movements.
Where are they going to cross?
Right.
Is that your question? Well, pedestrians cross wherever they want to, really, even in where it's not allowed. There's still a lot of debate on whether or not you put a marked crosswalk anywhere these days.
Well, I'm not talking about Sunrise, just within the Division 3.
So pedestrians are going to walk whatever, and different pedestrians are just like different drivers. They're going to take a different route to get the same direction. So a pedestrian is going to take whatever path they want to take. If they're comfortable walking down on the west side, then they'll take it, or they'll just cross the street wherever they feel more comfortable.
Thank you.
Question. On that Sunrise Place Southwest, where does that lead to, that road that goes up there? Is there a park there?
This road or this road?
Yeah, that road, the second one, yeah, going up to the,
From my understanding, that just dead ends. Well, it goes up and eventually it doesn't connect anywhere else, but
to where?
it connects to other neighborhoods up there, but it doesn't go anywhere beyond that.
Oh, okay. So do we know how much or how many homes there are up there?
I do not know that off the top of my head, no.
38, okay, yeah. I like the concept of phase 2 and phase 3, and then you have your phase 1 earlier. Are you going to have a sign that says you're entering Kelkari development, and then on the other side you have another sign that says you're exiting Kelkari, or welcome, welcome, something like that, that bonds it as a development, as a neighborhood?
I know there's an existing sign out at this intersection currently that is going to be relocated in some manner. I don't think they're going to have, there's going to be another sign down here, but just to let people know that this is Kelkari.
Yeah. But there are other homes up there, 38 homes up there, so they'll be using that road to come down here then,
Yeah.
come down the hill.
I had one more follow-up question. Sorry, I should have tagged this on my last comment. So the existing trail that's being moved 15 feet, and you're reconstructing a stair, right there, does that connect to a trail then across the street?
No, it doesn't, actually. Rich Wagner again. You basically, you arrive to the top there, you take a couple, 3 breaths, because it's a nice little climb up, check both ways and cross the street. We've talked about whether there should be a crosswalk there, and that was not supported in our studies, just because of the amount of traffic. And again, as Mike mentioned, when you paint a crosswalk, you infer a safety that's not really there.
Okay.
But it does lead to the rest of the trail.
Oh, yes, yes, I'm sorry, yeah, it
So there
crosses
is
here.
a connection there.
And then you walk on the sidewalk, what, maybe 50 feet, 100 feet, something like that?
Almost right across the street, yeah, from the trail.
Okay, and then it heads up.
And I guess that was my question then. Would a demarcation of that crossing be prudent? It sounds like you've addressed that and determined that no, it would be potentially more of a hazard than a benefit.
You know, when I go back and look at the original plans from 98, 97, the concepts, that trail came up here and crossed straight away, but then there was a really nice wetland down here identified. And so when the route was finally built, it was routed around that wetland.
Okay, thank you.
Question, Mr. Chair, not traffic, but this is for Mr. Wagner. Phase 1, it's all done, it's nice, and you've used that as a follow-up to the phase 2 and 3. Are the floor plans similar to phase 1?
For phase 2 and 3?
Correct.
No. In fact, that's one of the changes that's happened in the marketplace. The phase 1 is they're condominiums, and they're all flat apartments, 3 levels up, serviced with an elevator, parking below in a subgrade garage or daylight garage. Phase 2 and 3 are going to be townhomes. So they're, again, 3 stories, but each level, each townhome would have its own entrance.
Okay, okay. But the elevations, you're trying to copy that of phase 1?
Well, I hesitate to say copy, but let me say mimic.
Yeah.
This is a good example, and one of the things that we've been proposing to do to get those big roofs, you know, you can see, if you look very carefully in the grading plan, which I would not encourage you, because it's real detailed.
Yeah.
There's sometimes minor steps as you go down the hill here, just to connect to the grade. But to get the big roofs, we're looking at some of the upper floors having a plate line a little higher than the higher floor here. And that allows us to thrust that roof across.
Okay, can you go to slide 22, the next one up? Okay, now looking at this, you know, I couldn't tell which is real, which is existing, and which is proposal. I take the upper
these
left hand is
computers-
existing. Huh?
These
other
computer
three are
graphics are pretty
proposed.
amazing, yeah.
Yeah,
These two are proposed.
okay,
These are pictures of existing Phase 1.
okay. So the elevation, you're trying to stay with the same modulation, I think. I like
Same.
your idea about the vertical modulation as well. Whereas the other one, it's because it's a 4-story, you're pretty much forced to have vertical modulation down to a minimum. But the new ones, the proposed one, you have a lot of modulation, which is good.
Thank you.
Okay,
Can I ask a question?
thank you.
While we're talking about floor plans, I'm trying to get my head around density a little bit. Obviously, the impervious surface has gone down, square footage is down, but and so in the previous scheme, how many bedrooms were in the previous scheme per unit, would you say on average? Was it 2 bedrooms?
Probably average 2. Now, I'm going back many years.
Okay.
But I don't think there's any 1-bedrooms.
No 1 bedrooms.
Are there? Okay.
Not in the current design.
In what we're proposing?
Right.
Correct.
All of them now are 3 and 4 bedrooms, correct?
Some would have an alternate den, bedroom, media room, but yeah, 3
Okay.
for sure.
So I'm trying to just get my head around density, and so let's just say at 162 units, there may be 2 occupants per unit, just as an average. That's 324 occupants. And at 72 units, say potentially 4 occupants per unit? As you can't say how many people are going to
Yeah,
occupy it, but
What's the
density
median?
per unit could go up, but the unit goes down to 288. So it's more of just a question. Do you feel overall that the density will be lower with the proposed scheme?
Density measured in occupants?
Occupant, yes.
I think it could be a little higher.
Okay.
What's the median size of a family in Issaquah? 2.4? I don't know.
2.3, 2.2.
Okay. Yeah, and obviously you can't predict that, I'm just trying to get my head around, obviously the project is smaller, but could there be potentially more people, and as a result, automobiles, traffic, et cetera, in the proposed scheme?
Yes, people. I know that there was some discussion about whether we're going to allow children in Issaquah or in this project. That might be a change. I don't know if there's children living in Phase 1 now. The traffic, again, parking, we've got really plenty of parking. We've got 2 stalls in every garage, plus we've got guest parking. Will that work? I drive through single-family neighborhoods all the time and think it should work, but no one's putting their car in the garage. I suspect we all can point to those.
Okay. And then the last question I had is, will the townhomes be held in ownership the same way the condominiums will? Meaning, are they participating in the association? And will they have access to the amenities?
Yes and yes.
Okay, thank you.
I should note on that, the amenities of the residents of Phase 1 will also have access to the amenities of 2 and 3.
Okay, sure.
We're
Thank
trying to keep a neighborhood.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much.
Further comments from the commissioners? What I'd like to do is open the discussion to the public. After that discussion, we'll have our closing discussion. Okay. All right, so at this point, I'd like to call Joanne Van Dusen as a member of the... I'd ask you to state your name and address for the...
My name, okay, can you hear me? Okay. My name is Joanne Van Derzen. Live in Phase 1, Building C, second floor, one-bedroom corner unit, right next to the wetland and the beautiful creek. If I'm a little stiff today, I just got off of a very long flight. And one of the things over Labor Day weekend was a show that said, what is one of your memorable things from the summer? My memorable thing from this summer was coming into Kelkari. I've been there 16 years. And for me, the most memorable thing was coming into Kelkari, the beautiful trees that I hope will not be cut down, and the deer crossing Cabin Creek Lane right by the clubhouse. They eat up on the hill where one of the buildings is going to go. They cross Cabin Creek Lane, and they eat on the other side where the next buildings are going to go. So for me, for me, whenever I see that, it's like, what's going to happen to them? This is my second meeting that I went to, and I went to the so-called town hall they had at the Phase 1, and the meeting became so contentious that my question never did get answered, and I packed up and I walked out. And that's actually why my neighbor didn't come, because she was afraid that she was going to encounter one of the similar things. But I came to many of the development meetings that the city hall, that you people have had. So the questions that I had for me were, how many trees are you going to cut down? What's going to happen to the deer? And the noise that's going to impact me in the corner there. And I was listening to your comments, the person here in the corner there, I don't know what your name is, and you said that there's a condition where the construction traffic will not use the turnaround on Sunrise Place and First. I know exactly where that is. That's a big cul-de-sac. So where I live, in the building, I don't know if you can put that up there, but there's like a little turnaround. So are the construction people going to come down that street and then turn around by the C building and then go out? I don't know where that man is. Can you put that thing up there? And when you come down Cabin Creek Lane, and then the C building is here, the back of the B building, and then there's like a little turnaround.
The picnic area?
By the picnic area.
Maybe called it picnic.
Right there, yeah, right here, right there. So what I'm concerned about is the construction is only going to be 8 to 4. So maybe they start arriving at 7 and they'll run their dump trucks or whatever right around in there. Well, my bedroom happens to be right on the street there. So what's going to happen to the quiet privacy of me? So whoever has control over keeping your dump trucks and your trucks out of there, put that on your list, please. And there was, at the town hall at Kelkari, somebody mentioned on the plans that there was supposed to be a trail that was going to be right along the C building on that one side where the creek is and the wetland, and that's all grown up now. So I don't know how they're going to squeeze a little trail in there for the public, because I thought that wetland was preserved and you do not cut trees down. That was the other thing. How many trees are you going to cut down? Because it seems like they're going to take quite a few trees. So I think I have covered everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Linda Springman.
Thank you. Good evening. Linda Springman. I live at 1015 First Place Southeast in Issaquah, which I'm going to try and put this microphone back, which is in the Foothills development and right below the Phase 1 development of Kelkari. I spoke 2 weeks ago, so I'll try not to be too repetitive, but I was interested to see in the packet that was posted on the website that some of the things that were brought up were addressed, and I felt like some were explained away, but not really addressed. So there's a couple of things that I just wanted to cover with you, and one is that I will be repetitive when I tell you that I strongly believe that decisions we made 20 years ago should not be made using the same data. And I would refer you to page 19 of 36 in the packet, where you've identified what standards are being used to make the decisions on this project. It looks like the two areas that are of my biggest concern that I'm going to talk about today are using 1999 approval standards, and those are the geotechnical evaluation of man-made slopes and the traffic impact fee. And what I would ask is if somebody can clarify for me what the standards were in 1999 and how those differ from what they are today in 2017. If they're no different, that's helpful to know. But if there are things that have changed in the standards between that time, I'd like to know what they are so that we know what compromises we're making. Related to both of those areas, one of the things that came up earlier was the request for a signal at Sunrise and Wildwood, and I'm not sure I really remember that, but I may have been the person who led us astray because I was confused last presentation. The traffic area that is the huge concern for us right now, getting to our neighborhood, is at the intersection of Newport Way and Wildwood, which is down the hill about half a mile towards Wildwood from the Kelkari development, another half mile down the hill to Newport Way. The traffic jam goes all the way back to the elementary school, frequently, multiple nights a week, and efforts to try and come up with a solution to that have been unsuccessful so far, suggesting that they keep the traffic going towards along Newport Way east into the left-hand lane so that people wanting to go up to the neighborhood turn right. People last time talked about how residents trying to access Wildwood will stay in the left lane, and then when the traffic is stopped, turn right in front of them, which is highly unsafe. I have many times detoured up Mountain Park, gone all the way around the hill to get down to Sunrise Place, because it would just take an inordinate amount of time to get to the turn signal. So what I would ask, instead of just telling you what the problem is, I have a suggestion. What I would like us to do is see if we can do a traffic study so that, I don't know what the requirements are, what the amount of traffic at a signal needs to be, but I would love it if we could do a traffic signal review to see what kind of traffic is using that, what the backups are like, and so that we can try and remediate that. I know it's fewer people that were originally approved for this development, but it is going to be additional traffic than there is today, and it's already just really impossible to get to the neighborhood. The second thing I wanted to address is regarding the Geo surveys, and I am not an expert on this, and I know that a lot of really smart people have done a lot of work on trying to understand the stability of the ground that we're talking about. I know that 500 feet away, to me, does not seem like a very long distance to have had a landslide. And I get that the ground changes every 10 feet, or I don't know how often, but to me, something within 500 feet that had a landslide is really concerning to me. I know that when the Talus development was being made, there were probably geological surveys done, and a landslide happened. Also, I think people knew that there was a possibility, but a lot of really smart people built, and there was a landslide. So I'm uncomfortable with it, and I think you are too, and I will refer you to it was item 7 in the 150-page packet from 2 weeks ago that talked about the steep slope indemnification. There's only one place in that 150 pages where there was discussion of this, and it said, prior to issuance of a building permit, the applicant shall establish a mechanism acceptable to the city which notifies future buyers of the apartment/condominium units or lots that the steep slope buffers were reduced and that development has occurred within 50 feet of a steep slope. The applicant shall execute an agreement that indemnifies and holds the city harmless for development within 50 feet of the steep slopes. To me, that says you have a question too. So I would like further review done. I think this goes back to that we're using a 1999 standard, and I just would like us to triple check that nothing's going to happen. Thanks for your time.
So, thank you. I can't tell if that's Mary Ann or Marvion Crane.
I'm Mary Ann Crane, 1232 Sunrise Place Southeast in Issaquah. Also live in the Foothills, as does Linda Springman. Certainly agree with everything she said. I did send comments in that I think you referred to. I couldn't hear you quite well. One of them was about the construction hours that you said you were going to talk about later. One of our big concerns is parking and access into the Foothills, which is the development after Kelkari. You asked about that earlier. There's 38 homes there in the first and second cul-de-sacs. I did see something that talked about perhaps suggesting traffic be restricted to one side of the street, but I didn't see anything that said a decision had been made. And I think it's really important that we have some assurance that that's going to happen. Now, when people use the trail and they hike and they park on both sides of the street, you can see it's very, very narrow. The Issaquah School District determined that they couldn't even get their buses down past Kelkari into Foothills, and the only stop is at the corner of Wildwood and Sunrise Place that Linda talked about. And school buses are shorter than fire engines, et cetera. So that's a very big concern we have about emergency vehicles having access. And honestly, construction workers, I'm not sure where they're going to park, but they shouldn't be parking on that road either. So I think it's really important that it be designated a fire lane, as we have down where we live in the Foothills. We don't have parking on the one side all the way down through the cul-de-sacs. It's a fire lane all the way. And we really would urge that you all consider that and see that it's enforced. I'm not a traffic person, but I don't understand what the numbers were on that chart. You made reference to the fact that they're townhouses. Well, I think there's going to be at least 2 cars in each, maybe 3. That bumps the number from 72 to close to 150. Your chart indicated only 26 cars would make an AM trip at peak. That's 1/6 of the vehicles that are going to be there. I'm just not clear where those numbers are coming from. Most people are going to go to work, and they're going to go rush hour, so how 26 from 150 or 160, I don't know. 33 in peak hours on the PM, I'm not sure how we got that low of a number either, so I'd like some clarification on that. Thank you for your time.
Richard Kendall.
Good evening. I'm Richard Kendall at 116 Northwest 70th, Seattle 98117. I am not going to speak tonight, but I would like to submit into public record 2 letters from area residents that could not be here tonight that are in support of the project. May I do that from here?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's everybody that signed in. If you would like to speak, I'd encourage you to come and sign in, and we'll
Put a sign in after you speak.
Oh, okay, just set it down here.
Hi, my name is Tom McDonald. I live at 1227 Sunrise Place Southeast, Issaquah, Washington, 98027. And I think one of the primary things I want to talk about is the traffic part. So if these are houses, they're going to be, I will say Kelkari is a pretty nice development, the first couple of places as far as architectural. And so the places, the new development that's going to be put up are going to be, I would say, probably going to be pretty expensive, which means people are going to have to work to buy those, which means they're going to be leaving early in the morning. So the 26 trips a day just doesn't make sense. I would say that there's probably going to be at least one car per household that's going to be leaving early in the morning. The afternoon may vary because the PM trips will vary based on work schedule. But in the morning, getting the kids out to school, going to work, that's all going to be a pretty much set time frame that they're going to be going out. I would agree that I think a traffic light at Sunrise and Wildwood is not a good option because of the grades coming down. That will induce accidents if that happens. But where there is a problem is at Wildwood and Newport, where there's 2 lanes when you're going eastbound in Newport, as if you're going to go south on Front Street. People will occupy, as was mentioned earlier, the right-hand lane to continue right to take a right turn, where that right-hand lane could be a right turn only onto Wildwood. That would help part of it. And the inside lane would be the through lane. Once you get through the intersection of Wildwood, then that could split and they can go into either lane after that. That would help some of the backup there. Although the backup does go back up to the elementary school and to Target. So I think some clarification on how the trip number 26 came up is the main question I have. And also I thank Kevin or Keith for information provided as far as the cul-de-sac turnaround in first place. The other question I have comes back to playgrounds and area, and one of our concerns is we have a play yard that has swings, has slides, has basketball court, and if there's nothing like that in this development, that they're going to be migrating down to our playground, and that opens our liability potential for accidents they might have in our area, where if they don't have anything in this development that might provide for those same amenities for the range of youth that are going to be living there. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Please don't forget to sign in, please.
Hello, my name is Pat Duke. I live on 375 Southeast Croston Lane in Issaquah in Old Town, really close to here. I have probably gone hiking, walked from my house up there and taken those little trails. And honestly, I didn't know that Traverse Trail existed until about 6 months ago. So here for years, I've been, going down and walking along the street and down through Sycamore when I, didn't want to be up in the woods. It was too late in the day or the weather was awful. I've probably been in that neighborhood, walked it, been on the existing trail that goes, down, what do they call that? The creek, down along Cabin Creek there, at least 100 times. And so, Raymond, I wanted to let you know that, I forgot. Anyway, if you want to go for a walk there sometime, I'll take you through that area because when you were talking, I could just tell. I thought you can't visualize what's there. Also, that little trail that's down there now, I don't know if the city has a responsibility for that or if the Kelkari has a responsibility for it. It's so decrepit right now. There are a couple itty-bitty bridges on it, and they're just literally falling apart. But anyway, what I want to say is I've been up in that hill a lot. now in the last 6 months. I was there last Sunday with Janet Wall, and I don't know how many of you know her, but she's been for a long, long time on the Rivers and Streams Board in Issaquah. She's a very well-respected scientist, and she's lived in Issaquah for a very long time, and she just loves this town and has a great deal of interest in it, as do I. And by the way, I've been here since 1986, and I've been a homeowner the whole time I'm here. So I just want to say that I think this planning is beautiful. I think it's, very well done. I was impressed with the architectural plans and everything, and with the sensitivity to things like impervious surfaces. There is a tremendous amount of water coming down that hill. I'm a native plant steward, and I was with Janet, who knows a lot about the rivers and streams, and she could hardly believe her eyes. She said, I've never been on a trail. There are certain plants that grow where there has to be a lot of water. And one of them, as I mentioned before, is maidenhair ferns that come growing straight out of the hillside. And just as far as your eye can see, there's banks of them. And pretty much that happens where there's water seeping. There's a creek there were two creeks running on that little traverse that goes between this area and Sycamore. There are two creeks running 2 weeks ago. Last Sunday, one of them was barely running at all. The other one was running just fine. So there are some places where water, I guess, could drain into those creeks as long as it can drain there and still stay clean, because those are really untouched areas. I'm going to re-extend my invitation and say that if anybody wants to go on this hike, it's only 1 mile. It doesn't take very long. Please send me an email or give me a call, and I'd be glad to take you up there. If you just want to go up there and walk on the streets, I'm just pretty familiar with that area. I also want to say that I agree with Melvin when you talked about walking up there. I think even though obviously, I'm going to go where there's a sidewalk, but I agree that it seems really natural to cross the sidewalk across Sunset there and walk where the sidewalk already exists right now. You talked about, do you need those extra sidewalks? And anyway, I don't know by the time you get all these other cars there, and I think, I don't know, I mean, do they actually have no children allowed or something like that? I mean, I can't see having townhouses that are 3 and 4 bedroom and building by a forest. I mean, if I had a young family and had the money to buy one of those, I mean, here's a place where I can take my kids out onto the trail and down to the creek and all that sort of thing. So I really think this is going to be family. I think you're going to have at least 2 cars. How many parents don't take their kids, preschoolers and children, to school nowadays? And how many parents live in a family where only one of them works? So I think if you have 72 new units going in, you can count on at least 144 cars going out of there every day. I also want to say, because I've walked this area so much, that intersection of Wildwood and Newport, not only is that hazardous for cars, but that's hazardous for pedestrians. I often walk over by the salmon hatchery and cross the street there where there's I think you just step on a pad and it blinks a light and cars, know that you're waiting across the street. That's fine by me. I like that better than a regular stoplight. However, when I come down to the bottom of the hill, there's a sidewalk on the uphill side, which I like to walk on because I have a great view, and because the sidewalk is kind of down from the road on the other side. But then when I get to the bottom, all of a sudden the sidewalk is gone, and that last block, there's no sidewalk on that side of the street, and it's a blind street crossing because it's a hill and cars are coming down and coming up and turning the corner, and they can't see me, and I have to look back and forth and just kind of run for it to cross the street. And then, where I want to go down where the traffic's safer, I have to cross the street twice to get over by the salmon hatchery. It's really weird. So I do think you should do a traffic study at the intersection of Wildwood and Newport Way. Let me see if there's anything else here. Oh, I just want to say that having lived in Issaquah for a long time and having seen the changes that have occurred over the past years, I really think that trying to make decisions or making allowances today based on standards that were in place in 1991, I think in 1999, I really do think you need to take a look at whether those standards are still appropriate today. Because your home is such a big investment in your life. And to think that somebody would buy a beautiful place to live in and be building it on ground that might possibly slide is terrible. And a friend of ours, I knew her very well. Our kids went to grade school and high school together. Her home was on the street above that, and she lost her home. And because that home had been there for, I don't know, like 15 or 20 years or something like that, she tried to go for the city, tried to go for the county, tried to go for the builders. She ended up losing her home completely with no redress. And she was a single parent with 2 kids. So, and it was a lovely little home. So anyway, consider that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Mr. Rowley's next.
More comments?
Excuse me. I'm Skip Rowley, 1595 on Northwest Gilman Boulevard. My daughter Carrie and I were the original developers of Kelkari Phase 1. That piece of property has been in our family since 1954. And when we decided to build Kelkari Phase 1, Carrie and I went through 3 different architects to try to come up with 3 different plans that fit that property. It wasn't until we got Rich Wagner in our office, who at that time was with Bayless Brand Wagner, I believe was the name of the firm. Rich was able to show us how he could design and fit onto that piece of property something that would be very similar to a ski lodge from the west part of the United States, and how it would fit in to the trees and all of that. And I think that he's done a very good job in doing the same thing with what Intercorp is proposing. When we decided to sell that property, that decision was primarily based on the fact that we got a development agreement with the city of Issaquah for the 80 acres that we have down on the commercial floor, and we wanted to spend our time and efforts developing that. And in between Kelkari Phase 1 to today, we've been through a major recession. The construction costs climbed to a point where Carrie and I didn't think we could afford to do it. So when we marketed, we had 6 different development companies come to us with proposals, and the only one that we really wanted was Intercorp, because they have the ability to do the project, to pay for it, to build it on time, and do a really good job. I'm familiar with some of the slide issues that happened with Foothills. There should be no problem with the development of Kelkari Phases 2 and 3. I don't want to scare people with the idea that this thing might slide, because it won't if it's done properly. We had the issue up at Talus, and that was another instance where something wasn't done quite right. But the soils on this property are fine. I also want to remind everybody that this property abuts a 40-acre state park. No, not state, King County Park. And all of the property up above it is so steep that nothing will ever be built on it. So this is a small little indentation in a very huge piece of property that will be open space for everybody to enjoy. So I would hope that you would look on favor of this. I think Intercorp has done a fantastic job of working with the city staff and going through this project inch by inch. This idea that all of the rules and regulations of 1990 or 99 or whatever it was affect this property, that's not right, because the up-to-date soils, the up-to-date wetlands, all of that sort of stuff is part of this project. So I hope you do it. It's a good project. I think Issaquah will be better for it. Thank you.
I am Deirdre Wyden. I live at 1000 Cabin Creek Lane Northwest, B301. I'm the one that gets the view of the big new building right out my window. I'm not sure exactly how I feel about that. I really like the deer. I really like the wildlife. I like my little view of Shangri-La is the best way that I can put it. However, that being said, I do believe that Intercorp has done a really good job of working through this and presenting what they plan to do, and I appreciate it. I really do. I feel comfortable and confident in what's going to happen. I know I can't do anything about them developing the property. It's not mine. I just look over it. I also think that as a homeowner, probably is going to up my homeowner value. So my major concerns have to do with the changes to the neighborhood, and yes, they primarily have to do with traffic. I too try not to go out anywhere after 3 o'clock in the afternoon and come down Newport and have to go home because it's just ridiculous. And that's not part of a problem that really has to do with Wildwood or Sunset or anything. That has to do with the growth in the region and everything that's going on. That being said, I do believe, like Susan and others have said, that some more study or review over what the effects of the impact on traffic and the more bodies is going to do to what's there will happen. And I also don't know where the, 26 road trip, there are going to be 2 minivans that go out at least 4 times a day. I know that. My other concern has to do with the traffic that's going to be going on Cabin Creek Lane. And I understand that you're going to put a sidewalk in on the other side and in the building and that kind of stuff. There will be improvements made. I also know that all of the parking that you're talking about using is at the clubhouse. And granted, if there's nothing going on at the clubhouse, that's fine. There's 9 spots there plus 2 handicap. But there is no place else for anybody to park except in front of my building, which happens to be B, the first one, the closest to the new buildings and stuff like that. And I don't park in front very often because I have a parking place in the garage. But I don't think it's reasonable to think that you can put that mass of humanity and cars and people in one place and not provide a place for them to park. I also think that the road if you're out and the kids are going to school and they're waiting for the bus or their parents are waiting for the bus at the end of Sunrise where it goes across Wildwood there twice a day, there's a lot of people. And the people that live in Foothills have concerns too. There's just that's a lot of traffic. I don't know if anybody's done any traffic counts, or anything like that. I've read and I tried to look and read through some of the reports, but everything does seem to be related to 1999. And since then they've built, I don't know what, 80 more houses down at the end of the hill, and now they're going to add 72 more. And it's sort of like maybe it's time to think about what the massive traffic and the use of the roadways and the sidewalks for the community really is going to do. So, thank you.
Last call. Any other public wishing to make comment? If you do, please sign in.
Hi, Steve Pereira, 170 Northeast Dogwood Street for about 10 years. So a couple thoughts. One is, or I guess the first, it has to do, I guess, with kind of the cumulative effect of traffic and whether or not there should be a light at this one particular intersection. And maybe it's more addressed to city code. It seems like until you get to the point where traffic is impacted, there's no fees that are paid for that. Maybe there should be a cumulative effect of, or a fee paid into by developers for the eventual cost that's going to be incurred when that gets to a certain point. Related, this particular intersection, at some point, I don't know if there's any future way to mitigate traffic that goes up and down that on the existing roads. Maybe that should be part of the consideration of how you would mitigate the traffic that's already reported to be bad, and how development gets approved or not approved based on the cumulative effect and crunch points where traffic congestion happens. That's maybe broader than the scope of this body, but thought it was worth saying. Somebody mentioned the trail, and I guess I'm not sure if that's the responsibility of that's going to be relocated, if the Kelkari is maintaining responsibility for maintaining that trail going forward, as well as the initial movement of that trail. I want to deal with the comments where somebody made where their language had that the city would be indemnified from any risk of landslide. To me, gives some idea that there's risk of landslide possibility, and I think that if there's a perceived risk, then until that gets considered, it shouldn't be simply waved aside. I still have some concerns about the pervious versus impervious service. I'd like to see what specific things the developer will put in before this gets approved by this body. And there seem to be some other questions as far as whether or not things can be mitigated. Those should be developed and proposed before this body approves those, pending that feedback. Thanks.
Final call. I'm going to close the public comment portion of this meeting and ask the city want to make a comment, the applicant want to make a comment.
I think the city would defer to either the applicant if they want to address any of the issues, or to the commission if you want to further explore any of the comments that were raised by the community this evening.
Commissioners,
maybe. So there were a couple of comments that maybe a little more exploration or information would be helpful to understand for the commission, and I think for the public that are here this evening. A lot of concern, obviously, about traffic, and the whole region is struggling a bit with traffic. We all have that experience every day, I think. But the question was just, how is the traffic count actually determined? Is there a standard that's used, or is it judgment? And maybe a little bit more explanation about how the trip generation for the project was established, and that would be helpful.
I've been in 4 meetings today, so bear with me as I grab some papers here.
Yes, yeah. Introduce yourself once again.
Michael Reed, Transportation Engineering Northwest. So I'll answer that question 2 ways. One is we have existing count of traffic that's on Sunrise. And by my count, if there's 38 single-family homes downstream and there's 50-ish homes in Kelkari currently, there's got to be, I think there's some other homes prior to that. So let's just round it to 100 units that are of various forms that are on Sunrise currently. Right now, there's only about 50 vehicles in the peak hour that use that street, but yet there's 100 homes. So basically, that's a half a trip per home currently. We just performed some trip generation studies of some residential units in downtown Seattle just to kind of see what apartment units were generating in downtown, because people are building still pretty sizable parking garages in 200 to 300 plus apartment buildings. The trip rate for apartment building in downtown Seattle is less than 10% of units, sometimes even less than 5%. The rates that we actually applied in this particular analysis, and what a traffic analysis was done with new information, we looked at the original traffic analysis that was completed for Kelkari, and those trips that were associated with the additional 126 units that comprised phases 2 and 3, took those numbers, because it was a different type of unit at that point. In the context of the traffic study, it may be different in what was looked at in the build-out, but there was a specific trip generation number and traffic volume number that was mitigated and paid for back in the day. And then we used our standard ITE rates, Institute of Transportation Engineer rates. They publish average peak trip generation rates for different types of land uses. This falls into a condominium townhome land use, and we applied those rates for the proposed 72 units and took the difference. So that's where the genesis of the numbers came from, and also gives you a little bit of context of what's actually happening out there right now. So because there's a mixture of single-family homes, they're the largest trip generator of any residential use. But yet we have maybe half of them are condos. Out there currently, we're still on the very low end of the trip generation rate, given that context.
So you took a little bit of the work that was done to evaluate the existing condition, and then you overlaid that with the standard, essentially, that's the ITE standard.
Yeah, we just looked at the existing traffic to see whether there was warrants for turn lanes, whether that was a specific request, whether there was any other traffic issues going on out there. 50 trips in an hour on a street is, you can walk across the street without much problem. That's less than a car a minute on average.
This is I don't know if this is something that you gave any thought to, or this will come later with construction permits, but truck routes has come up several times in the last 2 public meetings. And we've got a new condition that's been now proposed to add to this amendment. So if you take away all of the turnaround opportunities for the trucks, how are we going to turn them around out there?
Well, I'm not specifically involved in the construction staging, but typically, I was just on a site today, the contractor realizes that he's not going to be storing materials, he's not going to be laying down equipment, he's not going to be parking his vehicles in property that he doesn't have the ability to control or operate on. So they're going to have to provide for that turnaround space on site as they're staging the property. So you typically go from, you do mass grading, get the site prepped, and you can start laying down stuff in one location first and build another one. So it's pretty logical, the contractors are used to doing that. I can see a concern of contractors they're like a lot of us, they want to park right in front of their workplace. So I can see the need to ensure, no construction parking or equipment storage or whatever on Sunrise for sure. And that's would be a normal condition of any, building permit or right-of-way permit. So
thanks. Keith, maybe a little more information on traffic control regarding truck routes, et cetera. How does the city deal with that during the permitting process?
Commissioner, before I go there, just one clarification. So Sunrise Place is a public street, and the city will likely not be regulating contractor parking on that street. It's public right-of-way. They have as much right to use it as anybody else. We may all not like that answer, but that's the right answer. In terms of construction traffic, so as part of the construction pre-con meeting, we have the ability to, unfortunately, none of these people other than the applicant really has a say in how all this fine-grained detail is going to work. So what will happen at the pre-construction meeting, which occurs after we issue the permits but before they actually start construction, is we will talk about this condition and how they will achieve the intent of this condition. So there's going to be, it'll be a challenge for some of the bigger, the framing trucks that come, maybe the concrete pumper, there's some that are going to have a challenge turning around. But because you're working on both sides of the street, it actually forms a split hammerhead with the way that the driveways are working. So I don't see this as being a big concern. But in terms of deliveries, this is a dead end, as was discussed before. So the truck traffic has only one way in and out. And that's via Newport, Wildwood, and then Sunrise.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Rich Wagner again. If I could elaborate on the question about the traffic and the intersections down the road, and especially in the comments that were last given. There's this trip point of which an intersection gets warranted for certain improvements. But long before that, and that actually is a kind of a step curve or step. But long before that, every project that comes forward has what's called a traffic mitigation fee. And those fees, many of them have already been paid for in phase 1 for many of the impacts in phase 2 and 3. So that money was already sent to the city years ago. In addition, there is trip mitigation fees that will be paid by this developer when the permit is being issued. Now, whether those fees are used to affect a certain intersection, that's really kind of a city decision. But I wanted to negate the idea that something can happen here and not contribute.
Thank you. Can I follow another exploration here? And again, the other area that got significant interest and questioning was around the geotechnical conditions out there and the nature of the investigation, the standards that were used to ensure we will have a stable site condition with this project. So, and again, there's some confusion about the standards here. And so there's some basic engineering standards that apply that are not specific city codes. But that being said, there was obviously studies that were done during the development for the first phase and this subsequent phase, and now we're moving this forward. Can you explain a little bit more about the nature of the investigation and anything about the standards that were applied?
Ted.
Commissioners, Ted Shepard again with Terra Associates. With regard to the standards that were in place in 1999 are the same as they are today in terms of the development standards. And they all stem from the GMA back in 1990, and King County came out with the standards for steep slopes, landslides, and basically defined a steep slope as a 40% grade or steeper. If you think about a 40% grade, that's a 2.5 to 1 slope. All highway embankments are 2 to 1, so technically they're a steep slope. The standards were, as they are today in King County and in the city of Issaquah, is that any steep slope that exceeds a height of 20 feet, you will have a 50-foot buffer, or in addition to that, a 15-foot building setback line, so total setback, if you will, 65 feet. The standards allow you to reduce the buffer to 10 feet. Pending geotechnical analysis, it demonstrates that the reduction in the buffer will not result in an increase in slope instability that could impact the project, or thereby the project impacting the slope. So that's the standard. The other standard in particular to this case is that there is an exemption an exemption that allows you to grade steep slopes that were created by previous grading activity. So on this particular site, there's been a lot of activity out here. The Phase 1 was built over an old coal tailings pile. All those buildings are supported on piles because the coal tailing, heavy buildings and the coal tailings went down about 50 feet, and that's far on the east end. As you come back on Phase 2, there's existing fill materials, some of it related to the coal tailings, but you get back into Phase 3. Phase 3 has actually been excavated. It was a sand and gravel mine where they mined the outwash sand and gravels, and that created the steep slopes. So by virtue of the code allows us to then to go back into those slopes and regrade them, and that's what our intent is to do on some of them. Post-grading, if they still remain at a gradient of 40% or steeper and exceed a height of 10 feet, then they would still be subject to the setback requirements, which we have here. We're maintaining a 10-foot buffer and a 15-foot building setback line from those slopes. So again, the standards are the same. We're not done yet. Again, this project, because of the recent interest, the slide that occurred at Talus 9, and then also with OSO in the past, we brought greater attention to the concerns with developing in steep topography. The initial critical areas report that we prepared has been peer reviewed by Golder. We've reached concurrence on that, but we're not done yet. We still have I mentioned that we wrote a geotechnical engineering report in 2015. I believe it's dated December 2015. We have to update that, and that update is going to include additional stability analysis reflecting what the grading plan actually is. Because when we did our original report, they had a conceptual grading plan, so we applied our analysis to that. Well, this thing has gone through several generations and iterations, if you will, of configurations and grades, and so our final geotechnical report will take into account what the final grades are going to be, and we'll have additional stability analysis. Probably might have to go out and do some additional site exploration to confirm some geology. That then will again be peer reviewed by Golder, and we'll have, I'm sure, a number of discussions with them. So, again, we're not done. So,
in your site investigation, did you do any subsurface sampling or anything like that?
Yes, we did. Yeah, we actually drilled 16 test borings on this site. Plus, we had from our previous exploration work, we had, I think, 5 or 6 test holes up in this area, along with a number of test pits. So we've got it pretty well covered. And we walked the slope all the way up to the top. I mentioned there was a lot of water on this side coming out of that slope, and they're absolutely right. There's a lot of water coming out of that slope. And we've got designs to control that so that it does not result in any impacts.
Thank you.
I'd like to add one thing. So there was a lot of comment about the city's requirement for indemnification. It's standard practice by the city to require an indemnification on property that is in a modified steep slope. There's really 2 reasons for that. Obviously, one is to try and keep the city out of lawsuits. But the second is to provide an additional piece of information for people buying houses. Because you go out there to this property when it's done, you may never know that there was a graded steep slope underneath the house that you're buying. So that indemnity becomes now part of the closing documents that you have, and is something that gives buyers a little bit better information before they potentially buy a unit.
Mr. Chairman, I had a clarification. I think I misspoke a little earlier, if I might. When I was talking about traffic mitigation, what I said about people, every project contributing to a mitigation fee, that part is accurate. Where I was inaccurate was I've now been reminded that for traffic mitigation fees on phases 1, 2, and 3 have already been paid. And those show on page, condition 1, page 42 in the latest staff report.
Thank you.
I just wanted to build on Commissioner Brennan's question a little bit about the steep slopes. And you may not be here yet, and this may be a question for you, so sorry if you have to come back up. Can you just speak a little bit to the construction methodology? How are these foundations being constructed, and how are the retaining walls being constructed? in terms of, are you using pin piles? Are you doing a stacked wall? Are those required? And possibly that's more of a question for structural?
No, that'd be a question for me. So, no, like I said, we went out and completed some fairly extensive additional exploration work in terms of 16 test borings throughout the site, because we knew there was fill on the site, so that was a concern, because our original recommendations for Kelkari, particularly with the big buildings, was and heavy loads with existing fill materials. Typically, there'd be a risk of settlement of those buildings if they were sitting on conventional spread footing foundations. So those recommendations were to put those big buildings on piles. The additional exploration work that we did out there demonstrated that the fill material is in pretty decent shape. And these are light townhome wood frame structures, so they don't weigh a heck of a lot. And so our intention there is that these buildings will be supported on spread footings, conventional spread footings, which won't be a problem. The retaining walls themselves on the walls that are going to be along the west side of Phase 3, 2 of those walls will be soldier pile walls, because we don't have the ability to cut back in and lay back the slope into the hillside. So those will be soldier pile walls. Basically, they'll come in, they'll drill shafts, insert a beam, concrete, and then as they excavate, they'll leg it. And so you support the toe of the hillside as the excavation is going on, so that it will be done there. The other walls on site will be reinforced earth fill, where they'll be used, geogrids will be used to reinforce the fill behind the wall, and then we'll have either a rock refacing or some other segmental wall facing, like the lock and load, or some of the keystones that are pretty common that you see around here. So those are how those walls. And then all the fill material, the slopes that are going to be regraded will be regraded to engineering standards. Fill materials, if there's a steep slope that's say, for example, a slope that's 20% or steeper, we bench and cut into that hillside to make sure the fill materials that are placed over that are locked in with that existing slope. Drainage is installed to make sure that we don't have any block off any subsurface drainage from backside, because when that happens, if you block it off, you can have a blowout, because the pressure's built up behind it. So that'll be all those fills will be placed and compacted in an engineered manner, and then once everything's all said and done, if there's a remaining slope that is 40% or greater, or from a retaining wall, there's a setback from that with the building construction.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just a follow-up question, and that's for Richard now. When you talk about soldier walls, retaining walls, you put it in. I mean, it's really nice. Are you just going to leave it the way it is, or does Richard plan on covering it?
Excuse me. I wanted to stand up here and say, after Ted is done and his crew's done, then Nick comes in, our landscape architect, and he addresses exactly how we're going to landscape the faces of these, whether they be rock walls or block walls or soldier piles. And all that's in the record and in the application.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one more question/comment, and this is for staff, for Keith. So there are lots of concern, obviously, about traffic, and particularly down at the intersection of Wildwood and Newport Way, and kind of what's happening along Newport Way. And we've heard that in other projects that we've had in front of us. And can you talk a little bit about what the city is doing to kind of respond to the community concerns, and then how people can get engaged? Because what's happening there is a little outside of the scope of what we're able to deal with directly here, but I know the city's paying attention to that issue and trying to find ways to respond.
So we are. So right now, Newport has been identified as one of a number of streets in the city that is maybe overdue for some attention. And so the city is moving forward with kind of a planning effort to do a corridor study, really in 2 parts. And think about SR 900 as the split point. So one is a west part from SR 900 towards Bellevue, and then the other is from SR 900 south. And so Ultimately, the vision for Newport is going to include the addition of some roundabouts to help facilitate traffic movement. I know that once you get to the south end of town, we're really dealing with issues of regional traffic on Newport, Front Street, and Sunset. It's all the traffic heading wanting to use Issaquah Hobart Road and work its way down to Maple Valley and ultimately Black Diamond. The city's also working with King County right now, re-looking at kind of Issaquah Hobart Road and whether there's opportunities to help facilitate the bottleneck that right now is kind of choking the south end of town. What I would say is anybody interested in having a conversation with the city's traffic engineer, Kurt Seaman with Public Works Engineering would be the right person for you to engage in a conversation about Newport on. I'm not qualified, but I have a card, and if you want to email me, I can send you Kurt's contact information.
And you also mentioned, I believe in the last meeting, that the city council's recently appointed a traffic advisory board.
They've formed one. They actually haven't been appointed yet.
Okay,
So
so
anybody interested in serving on the city's newly formed traffic advisory board, those positions will be advertised along with all the other boards and commissions at the beginning of January.
Thanks, that's
Thank you.
helpful.
Didn't pay as much as the Development Commission.
Other comments, questions, concerns?
I guess I'd like to internally get people's thoughts about the sidewalk, and Mr. Wagner could pull up a site plan again. And I like sidewalks. I like people to be able to walk on sidewalks. But on the other hand, I don't like creating more impervious surface than is needed. And I can understand the staff's position in wanting to have something that does connect to the street.
So I just want to be clear, you're welcome to have this conversation. The removal of a sidewalk on a street is an AAS process, which would be probably outside of this conversation. And the applicant would be able to make that application. The reason why there's a condition in the staff report now is their plans don't show that sidewalk. So staff was being clear that that needs to be there unless there's a separate AAS to remove it.
So it has to have a sidewalk on both sides of an internal street?
All streets in the city currently have sidewalks on both sides.
Including internal private streets?
We don't treat private streets any differently than we treat public streets.
In other words, you're saying it's a moot point for it?
I'm saying that you guys can have a conversation. I would love that input as the decision maker of potentially a request to remove a piece of sidewalk from a street. So if you guys want to deliberate on that, I would love that input, and I would actually consider it as part of the decision.
That helps, thank you.
Sure.
So again, my concern is that somebody, the units on the bottom end there that would be walking down that street to get to Sunrise, there's no sidewalk on the west side of Sunrise, on the bottom side of Sunrise, so they're not connecting into there. They would be having to cross Sunrise somewhere. And I always think, if it's me, I'm going to take the most direct path. And if I'm at the end units at the bottom, just slightly below Rich to the right there, if I come to there, instead of going around a sidewalk, I'm going to go straight across. So
It's not because you're lazy?
oh, I am lazy.
Smart. He's being smart. He's going to take the shortcut.
That's right. I'm smart and lazy.
Yeah. I take the same route, cut over there, and then just cross when I get to the other corner. Yeah.
It depends if you're, sorry. I think it depends if you have a bike with a little kid on it, you won't be able just to jump and cross. Or if you have a stroller, it's a little bit more complicated. So if you're doing this as a pedestrian, you are, but if you have little kids with you in strollers, which I'm pretty sure there will be plenty, it's going to be complicated. So people will take the long route, which I currently take. So.
They'll still have to cross the street somewhere.
where they have the crosswalk, they will have the dip of the actual crosswalk, and they won't be going above and under the curb. You have a,
So at the end of the buildings, where there's a crosswalk in front of the buildings, it would come down? If it did end there, it would come down right there as a dip to the street level?
Oh, if the sidewalk ended here?
Yeah.
Actually, in our current proposal, if I go back up here, there is a concrete crosswalk here, which obviously it would not serve these last 4 units. But the intent was to bring people down this sidewalk and cross here and then down in the initial proposal.
So, it's weigh in on this really quick. I actually, it's always a balance, all right? Because we're trying to minimize the footprint in impervious area, while at the same time we want to have something that's attractive and convenient for the people who live there. In this particular instance, since where people are going to travel is going to be up Sunset, that it doesn't seem to me that extra segment of sidewalk is going to serve a lot of benefit other than creating impervious area. If you create a transition at the end of the sidewalk where somebody with a stroller can now cross over and then enter the sidewalk on the other side. But without a curb cut, I tend to agree. I think if you've got a stroller, hopping curbs and stuff is a little bit challenging, particularly on a slope.
yeah.
So if there's not a solution that provides that kind of convenience for the multiple conditions pedestrians might be dealing with, like strollers and bikes, then you'd need a crosswalk on both sides of the curb cut up at the intersection, which would be the typical design of a sidewalk and road.
Does that help?
So if, there was definitely maybe some different thoughts there. I would say if the applicant wants to request the removal of sidewalk, I will try to incorporate this conversation into that decision. And that's on the record here.
Thanks, Keith.
We can certainly address that later, unless we're looking for a conclusion tonight.
No,
Okay.
given what Keith provided,
I think that would be handled through a separate process.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll work with you. Yes.
So other comments, concerns, issues that need to be discussed?
Information that we need. Just one quick, we've got a significant amount of information in front of us now that we've had a chance to review. And the questions, are there any gaps of information that we need to fill here? And I just, from my perspective, I think I have the information that I need to get to a decision. I don't know if the other commissioners are in that place this evening, but we'd like to hear that. And if we are, and we feel like we've got the answers to the questions and we're satisfied with the design, then I would suggest we advance the project. So, and move toward a motion if we're comfortable.
And I want to, if I may, Commissioner, sorry, I'm a little slow tonight. I've been in this room too much this week. There was one other comment earlier that I'd like to actually spend just a minute on, and that's construction noise and impacts and hours. So what I would say is, and staff's, the comment earlier was, or the response maybe was a little bit briefer than it needed to be. So the city just went through a process of updating our off-hours construction practices. And right now, it used to be fairly typical for contractors to ask to work on Saturdays, for contractors to work till 7 or 8 o'clock at night, because during the summertime when the sun's out, they're trying to squeeze every hour they can out of the workday. And so what was clear to us is, especially as some of these new projects started to get built adjacent to existing neighborhoods, is that our neighbors were taking the short end of the stick, and they needed to, we needed to rebalance that. So right now, basically, our construction, off-hours construction code would say they cannot work on Saturday, period, unless they get concurrence from the existing neighborhood. So if they want to work on a Saturday, they're going to have to ask Kelkari Phase 1 and Foothills if it's within a certain distance of the construction hours, because, you know, people just get saturated with noise and being inconvenienced and dust and everything else. So there's also that kind of going beyond the normal construction hours is also something when you're in a residential area is likely not going to get approved. We've also changed our notification to where now we are moving towards requiring a project sign. So there will be a project sign out on Sunrise that will not only identify who to contact from the contractor to the property owner, if there is, so if they're coming in with their dump trucks at 6 a.m. because they got there early, there's not only city dispatch that you can call to complain, but you can also call the contractor's contact number as well as the property owner. We also are providing kind of updates on a monthly basis so that you guys can come and see what do they expect to get done that month. You know, maybe it's working only on Phase 2, or maybe it's doing foundations on Phase 3, but going framing on Phase 2. That just helps get the information out. And so the city's doing a lot to help with communicating those construction impacts to neighbors. And so hopefully that's at least a little bit of solace, knowing that you'll hear the noise, you're going to not like the dust and the inconvenience, but hopefully we'll keep that as minimal as we can. So I just want to put that on the record.
So Keith, let me clarify that. So no work on Saturdays and Sundays. You said Saturday.
Yeah, no work on Sundays, no work on holidays. The city does Saturdays on a case-by-case basis. And if they're adjacent to a residential neighborhood, we basically ask them to get the homeowners association to authorize it before we'll give them approval to do that. So it puts the power really in, it helps both the developer want to be good neighbors with, because they actually hold some power over them if they want to work on Saturdays or beyond the normal curfew time during the week.
And on weekdays, what time do they?
I believe on weekdays, right now we're either at 6 or 7. I can't remember which. It might have been 7. I think we dialed it back to 6, but I don't know for sure.
6 a.m.
6 p.m. is the end time. Did you say end or beginning?
Beginning and end.
End. It's right now it's 7 a.m. to 6 p.m.
6 p.m. 7 to 6. Okay.
And the intent of 7 is they don't arrive on site till 7. So that's why sometimes you'll see contractors hanging out on I-90 on the off-ramp waiting for it to turn 7 o'clock if you're driving during that time. At least I do.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Other concerns? We move towards a motion.
I'll offer a motion then. We've got one buried back.
If
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Ooh, it'll be harder for me to read it from here then. So what I'll do is I'll just make this motion on the screen instead of reading it. So can we just add this motion to the record, which, if you'd like me to read it, I can read it. I'll read it. Mr. Chair, I move that the Development Commission approve the Administrative Site Development Permit ASDP 16-00004 Master Site Plan Amendment MSPA 16-00001 and Binding Site Plan Amendment BSP 16-00001 for Kelkari Phase 2 and 3 as described and evaluated in the amended staff report dated 18th of August 2017 with attachments 1 through 6 and project drawings and reports. The briefing response memo dated September 14th, 2017 the clarification of condition H relating to stormwater, the revision to condition N, adding first place to the condition, and subject to the conditions therein as amended tonight.
Second?
Any discussion, further discussion? But I'd remind, we can only have 7 votes, so Commissioner Sanford, I'd appreciate if you wouldn't vote, appreciate your comments, but, so all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries.
What's? And you can make me do all the work now. And I move that the Development Commission direct the Development Services Department to prepare findings of fact and conclusions for review and approval by the Development Commission Chairman, affirming the Development Commission's decision to approve the Kelkari Phase 2 and 3 project, file number ASDP 16-00004, MSPA 16-00001, and BSP 16-00001, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report dated 18th of August 2017, with attachments 1 through 6, and project drawings and reports, the briefing response memo dated September 14th, 2017, and the clarification of condition H relating to stormwater, the revision to condition N, adding first place to the condition, and subject to the conditions therein as amended tonight.
Second?
Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, would you say aye?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, once again, the motion carries, so I think we do appreciate the input from the public. It's part of the political process, and it's essential. Don't give up on us. We really do appreciate your input. And so with no further ado, let's end the meeting.
Anything else coming up for us?
I was thinking about that.